Hey fearsome friends, the creepers are out in force tonight. From biker bombers to nonsensical road rage, and a neon ski suit pursuer. The creepy guys need to have a word with themselves, or be locked up. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm. Are you scared yet? Keep being creepy. For as long as I can remember, people have always wanted to share their secrets with me. I am a watcher and listener by nature. I also like people and have a genuine interest in people around me, so I ask a lot of questions and listen attentively when people talk. Perhaps this is the reason people often remark that they are shocked by how much they have revealed to me. This is also the reason for my story. For years I worked as an exotic dancer. It was my career, and I didn't do it because I had to. I did it because I wanted to. Or at least that is what I told myself. I was pretty straight-laced for the business. I drank some, smoked a little weed, but I stayed away from anything stronger or more dangerous. I was busy saving and buying rental properties, so I stayed out of trouble, for the most part. The week my story happened, I was working at a strip club in Winnipeg, Manitoba. It just so happened to also be the week that a big national biker rally was going on too. The week started with the ex-president of the Winnipeg chapter's house being bombed. There was also a shooting in the lobby of the hotel where the club was and where I was staying. In fact, I was just leaving my room for a show when it happened. Now, biker gangs and strip clubs go hand in hand, and yet in the years I danced, I never went to parties or hung out at a clubhouse. However, that week I was working with a girl I had worked with a few times. I liked her and considered her a friend. She was also deep into the biker circles, and with a little peer pressure, she convinced me to come with her to the clubhouse. They sent a car for us, and when we got there we were immediately offered drinks. As we chatted up the mostly polite and pleasant, if a little scary to me men, I began to relax. I smoked a joint and was having a lively fun discussion with a nice non-threatening looking guy. As would often happen, our discussion quickly turned personal with him, telling me everything about his life. The next thing I know, how he set the bomb and blew up the house. I stopped him dead in his tracks, throwing my hands up to ward off his words. "I don't want you waking up tomorrow to remember the stripper you just spilled your guts to," I said. Shortly after, as the night wore on, my friend, sensing the room, knew it was time for us to get out of there in order to stay safe, and we were home and safely in bed by 12 a.m. So please, keep your secrets to yourself. So currently, I'm lying awake, and it's 4 a.m. I'm spooked by the sounds outside my window, so what better to do than to tell you all a story. For some context, I am small, was about 5 foot when this happened, and was a very, very stupid, naive kid. One day, my aunt and I went out to pick some stuff up from the supermarket, and I knew this particular store like the back of my hand, as I constantly went there for stuff with my mum. I had about $10 for snacks, and my auntie was in the next aisle. I was looking at the candy and holding my basket, just picking out anything that $10 could buy me. And as I was standing there, this old man crept up beside me. And for some reason, I didn't notice him at first. I turned to be at least 2 feet away from this 50 to 60-year-old man, wearing an all-white suit and fedora hat. He was tall, about 6'2" and skinny. When suddenly, he proceeded to grab my wrist as hard as he could and pull me closer to him. He said, "Little girls like you shouldn't be in big stores like this alone." Now I know what you might be thinking. Oh, maybe he was just trying to help or something. But no, this guy pulled me into him and bent down, giving me the creepiest, most unsettling smile ever. My little childish mind couldn't process what was happening. I was in such shock and so scared that I froze until my flight or fight response kicked in and I ripped my arm away as fast as I could. I backed up and was still in shock, but I swear to God my instincts took over and my legs started moving, so I ran as fast as I could to find my auntie. As I was running though, I looked behind me and the guy was still standing there smiling. And it wasn't a warm, welcoming smile. It was a creepy, I'm going to murder you if you run smile. Finally finding my auntie, I grabbed her arm and made her follow me to the aisle. And guess what? The scary old man was gone. I told her what had happened and we tried to find him, but no such luck. I told security and the manager what had happened too, but it was like he'd just vanished. And since he didn't really do anything, they couldn't say or do much about it. I'm still scared about this incident to this day. I've had other encounters like this, but this one was by far the scariest of all. I can still remember it so vividly, and I remember exactly what he looked like. This happened around 2001, when I was waiting tables and sometimes didn't get off work until after midnight. Once I'd gotten home and realized I had no cigarettes, I headed back out to a 24-hour gas station, and it was a Wednesday, so no one was out and about. As I pulled up to a red light in the left turn lane, next to me was a car so covered in bumper stickers I couldn't tell what color the actual car was. And something about it immediately felt off. So I stared straight ahead and waited for the light to change. Suddenly, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, and against my better judgment, I glanced right. I could see that this guy, the driver, was absolutely raging at me from the seat of his car, banging on the steering wheel, banging on the driver's side window, screaming and glaring straight at me with wild eyes. I assumed he was paranoid or mentally ill and thinks I'm out to get him or something. So I just stared straight ahead again and prayed for the light to change. And my car had manual locks, and I couldn't reach them all, so I was starting to really freak out, and the lights felt like they were taking forever. Again, my peripheral vision detected movement, and I glanced over again. He was now getting out of his car, still gesturing wildly at me and screaming. I decided at that point to just run the light, turn left and screech off into the night, keeping an eye on my rearview mirror for the car. Sure enough though, he ran the red light too, and turned left from the middle lane, coming after me. There was another red light coming up, so I blew through that one too, and thank God I saw him pull into a Goodwill store, turn around and head in the opposite direction. I eventually got my cigarettes and went home, watching carefully, but didn't see him again. I hope he got help. I'm a 23-year-old female, and it was my first semester at a major university, and I was sitting in an orientation class that was required for new students to take. Side note: I have a very bad habit of smiling at everyone I make eye contact with. I've gotten better at not doing it as much, thanks to wearing masks due to COVID, but I'm still working on it. Sometimes it's fine and people take my smile as just a kind gesture, but other times people take it as an invitation. Now this boy, let's call him Jake, took it as an invitation and a target. Anyway, I was sitting in a seat waiting for class to start when I made eye contact with Jake. I smiled at him and he immediately walked up to me and asked if he could sit with me. I said yes, because how do you tell someone you'd prefer not to talk to people and make friends in an orientation class worth 1 credit hour? So he sat down and of course started asking me basic questions like where I was from and what I was studying, blah blah blah. And I answered each question. Side note too. I've also gotten better at this, but I'm way too trusting of new people, and I always assume everyone is good until I'm proven wrong. I can also be a little naive. Then suddenly his types of questions took a turn. He started asking me more personal things like what my full name was, how old I was, did I live alone, what was I most scared of, and where I live in town. Now the town isn't small, but it has very well-known street names. But again, me being dumb and trusting, I told him all of it. I mean, I didn't give him my actual address, but I did tell him what intersection I lived at. I know, I'm dumb. Well, this whole time I'm talking to him, I'm looking straight ahead at the board, hoping class was going to start soon. Then after a long pause of him not talking, I looked over at him, and on his desk was a little journal that he was writing in. I looked at the page he was working on and immediately felt sick. There, in his journal, he had my full name at the top of the page, and then had all of my personal information written down on it. He had them next to bullet points: where I'm from, age, where I live, any pets or roommates, biggest fears, etc. It freaked me the hell out, and after that first class, I avoided him completely. Now fast forward a couple of months later, and I haven't seen or heard from him. But I joined a type 1 diabetic group chat where we would share diabetic horror stories. A few days after I joined the group, someone sent a message saying, "Everyone meet Jake. He doesn't have diabetes, but he'd love to learn more about the disease." And there was Jake, the creepy kid who sat next to me in class and jotted down all my answers to his creepy personal questions. I left that group chat shortly after that, and haven't seen him since, thank goodness. I have no idea what that journal was for, or what he did with all of my information. But since then I have moved and changed my major, not because of him, and it's been 4 years, so I'd say I'm safe for now. It was a warm, sunny day in mid-July, and the air was kind of hazy and full of the sounds of summer. My cousins and I were playing in the backyard as insects hid in the long grass, just on the boundaries of the safe garden, and the heath ran right through without a fence, gate or any other type of barrier, dividing our private back garden to the public. It was a very busy area. For example, if you were playing in the back garden and a random person walked past on the way to the heath, they were clearly visible from anywhere within the vicinity of the garden, as well as being very audible, even to the point of if the person knew our family, they were able to conduct a simple conversation with whatever kids were playing there. Now our gran always told us kids that the area directly outside the limit of the garden was strictly forbidden, and because she knew us 3 girls better than the back of her hand, this statement came with an extremely stern warning that if this rule wasn't followed, we would all receive smacked bottoms. So we all abided, even though the 3 of us had adventurous spirits. At the time of this incident, we were all playing on the crazy paving that our builder uncles had made to make it easier for my wheelchair to run safely along the ground as I played with the other kids. Elle was pushing me as fast as she could, and I in turn was pushing the ancient family pram that had been there longer than any of us had. We were playing mummies, and as usual, being the eldest, our cousin G was mum and picking flowers for the milk bottle from our treehouse. It was more of a cluster of bushes at the bottom of the garden, with a clearing which was easier to get to in a wheelchair-accessible treehouse, where all us kids played at one time or another. Suddenly, there was a sense of not being alone, and I think Elle and I both noticed this at the same time, because we raised our heads and looked in the exact direction where the creeping feeling was coming from. Just outside the back garden's entrance stood a strange-looking figure. It appeared to be a middle-aged, stocky man, dressed in shabby dark clothes, and we all confirmed this after the incident. He called out, "Hello, how are you?" We didn't answer as we usually did to passers-by who we knew. The stranger continued, "I've lost my dog. Have you seen a little white dog anywhere?" Being ever protective, G answered curtly, No, we haven't seen any dogs at all." The stranger didn't look at G but kept his attention on Elle and I, although he did respond to G's remark. "Oh dear. Will you help me look for her? She's not very old, and she might be lost. She couldn't have gotten too far." I immediately began to feel uneasy, and I knew Elle felt the same too, as I felt her pull my wheelchair back. I let go of the pram, even though we were a good distance away from the stranger, but he was motionless throughout this discourse, and it was really eerie how still he was. G, who had just turned 11, was adamant. "I'm sorry about your dog, but we can't help you. We aren't allowed to leave the garden." The stranger remained still and measured. "Come on, you won't be away for long. I'll pay you £5 if you help." Just then our older male cousin came around the side of the house, pushing his bike, followed by a family friend who also lived at the house. They had both returned home from work, and our attention was momentarily distracted away from the figure by their sudden arrival. When we looked back in the direction the stranger had been, he had completely vanished. Seeing his sister G's perplexed look, our cousin H asked, "What's up with you?" We all excitedly told H and our family friend about the strange happening and the man. While the family friend, slightly unnerved by our account, rounded the three of us up and hurried us inside, H immediately marched out of the back garden into the direction of where we said the man must have gone, cursing under his breath about dirty old men perving on little girls, only to return 20 minutes later, hot, bothered and cross. "Were you three having a laugh or what?" he said angrily. "There was no man around at all. In fact, I didn't see anyone at all. It's too hot to play stupid games. Little brats." The three of us were obviously indignant at this slur, as we had all seen and spoken to the same man. Later, when we were in the bedroom with my mum, she asked us about the incident. I still often talk about that day with my mum and cousins, and we still have no idea where the strange man could have gone, or who he was. Neither am I sure whether this belongs here, nor do I think that anybody is going to read, let alone believe this. But after 5 years, I feel like I need to get this off my chest. In September 2016, I was a 28-year-old student of engineering at Aarhus University in Denmark, and after having planned and arranged my exchange year as part of the Erasmus program for some months, the time had finally come to depart and head for Brussels, Belgium. I could only move into my flat in a student residence on the 20th September. That's when my contract started. However, my classes were scheduled to start on the 12th of September, so I thought it would be reasonable to arrive in Brussels a week earlier on the 5th and sleep in a hostel until moving into my flat, just so that I could get a chance to discover the city, familiarise myself with public transport, and buy a student's ticket that would allow me to use the metro, tram and bus for the coming year, basically for free. That way I could deal with all the formalities and paperwork without any pressure. I also had to buy some things for my flat. Wi-Fi was free in the residence, but I still had to buy a router, etc. so I had all the time in the world to deal with that stuff, and I was looking forward to having a great time getting to know the city and the new people and culture around me. French skills weren't a requirement in my case, as my classes would be held in English, but maybe I could even pick up some French before diving into my studies at Brussels University. Now, for the sake of avoiding any misunderstandings, I am a gay guy and not scared of telling anyone when the subject comes up. I'm very relaxed about it, and people probably would describe me as pretty masculine, straight acting and good looking. At least that's what people told me. I can be a little nerdy when it comes to the topic of engineering, but I'm usually pretty open-minded and sociable. So even though my arrival went smoothly, I quickly felt a little lonely and was glad to hit up conversations with people, which, however, wasn't always easy considering the language barrier sometimes. I was still very excited and positive though. I couldn't wait to immerse myself into my new environment. I checked in at the hostel, stowed my luggage away, and made myself comfortable to get some rest. It was a 4-bed room. I could tell that 2 other beds were used, and 1 was unoccupied. Shortly after, the most gorgeous and handsome guy entered the room. I was totally flabbergasted, and I was 100% sure that I was just experiencing what people called love at first sight. I was having the hardest time averting my eyes from him, but I tried my best, since I didn't want to creep him out after all. He was tall, very slender, had longish blonde hair, pale skin, pouty lips, and the greenest eyes I had ever seen on a person. Carrying heavy luggage, he entered the room and greeted me with a bonjour and a shy smile. He looked a little exhausted, so I figured that I should better leave him alone and not strike up a conversation with him straight away. I took a short nap, and after some time had passed, I had gathered all my courage and struck up a conversation with him. "What's your name? Where are you from? What's brought you here? How old are you? Do you study?" The usual stuff. I just had to get to know this beauty. According to him, his name was Alex, 22 years old, from Slovenia, and just travelling around Europe. I remember finding it a little weird that a 22-year-old could just afford to travel around like that, because as we know, travelling isn't exactly cheap. He was also very hesitant when it came to his work or studies. When we were talking about our hobbies and interests, he intended to keep it very general as well. His answers were very vague and nebulous, so I just concluded he was shy, which at the time made him even cuter to me. I quickly found out that he was single, and when I admitted to him that I was gay, he didn't seem shocked in the least. Instead, he was very accepting and didn't mind or care at all. We even joked about it. I, however, didn't really find out whether he was gay or straight. I was just simply happy to be able to talk to someone who was shy, though friendly, and accepting in a city I had never been to. Admittedly, I wasn't only stunned by his looks, he also seemed to have a good sense of humour and be intelligent. I'm not a native English speaker, but believe me when I say, this guy's English was close to flawless, even though his way of speaking appeared kind of weird for a guy of his age. While he didn't mind others using it, he never used profanity. I could tell also that he was fluent in French, but when I asked him to say something cool in Slovenian, he refused for some reason. He was shy, he was smart, funny, polite, incredibly handsome and weird. He seemed perfect, and I thought I was in love with him. My exchange year couldn't have started any better. I felt like I could talk to him forever. But yes, I did notice that he tried to be as vague with his answers as possible whenever I asked him a question. He preferred to be the one to ask the questions and just listen, laugh and crack a joke every once in a while. It turned out that he knew Brussels quite well. Wasn't he just travelling around? So I took the chance and asked him to maybe show me around a bit and maybe have a drink. Surprisingly, he agreed. Night fell and we headed out to the city centre. He showed me around, explained stuff, gave recommendations for restaurants, sites, etc. He even was so kind to tell me to avoid certain parts of town, because they were apparently predominantly Muslim and not very accepting of gay people there. All this made him even more sophisticated and world-wise to me. Bear in mind that I still had no clue whether he was straight or gay. Anyway, he really helped me to find my way around the city, even assisting me in finding the shortest way to my faculty. He had obviously visited Brussels before. Later, we headed to a bar with people from all over the world. Yet again, he was shy, but sociable and very accepting of anybody. He didn't mind me drawing other people into our conversations. He would get along with everybody. He'd listen, ask questions, listen again and accept. He would stay neutral and never give a definite opinion. His laid-back personality was in contrast to his carefully chosen words. You could pair him up with a complete arsehole, and he would still get along with him. This was also the year President Donald Trump assumed office, so I had many heated arguments with American tourists. They were all awesome people, by the way. And just when I thought Alex would back me up, he instead chose to de-escalate the situation and not take sides. He apparently hated to get into fights or arguments. At this point, I was rather confused about him. I didn't quite appreciate that he always insisted on paying the bills, sharing food with me, etc. He most likely thought that I felt helpless for being all alone in a town that I had never been to before. But after all, I was several years older than him and had enough money to care for myself. Things were under control, and I thought he was exaggerating a bit. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't pushing him into anything, and I wasn't mad at him either. I just wanted to be the one to have the pleasure of spoiling and caring for him, offering him things and inviting him, maybe even to have a relationship with him. And yes, I admit that I made a move on him, but as soon as I understood that he wanted to keep his distance, I respected that. One night I was so wasted, he had to calm down the taxi driver and make sure I didn't soil the taxi. I should have known better and apologized to him in the morning. And I may be wrong when I say this, but I was certain that he liked me too. At least back then when I was totally head over heels in love with him. During our stay together at the hostel, I got to meet many different people from different countries and backgrounds. There was a middle-aged French-speaking Moroccan guy who was on a business trip, a Chinese student, 2 German tourists who were very cool as well, and as I said, I got along with Alex really well, and I was convinced that there was some sort of connection between us. Whenever the Moroccan guy snored too loudly, Alex and I would exchange annoyed looks, and he would politely ask the Moroccan in French to please keep the noise down. Alex didn't sleep much anyway. I quickly learned that. He just wanted to make sure I could get enough sleep. And one time, Alex claimed to have overheard a conversation of those 2 German guys joking about my homosexuality and advised me to be careful. He said that they hadn't been mean, but that I should take them with a grain of salt. I was thankful, but couldn't help but confront him about how he was able to understand them when he told me before that he couldn't speak German. I could just make out some bits, he said. So I was not totally blinded by love. I knew he was weird, and I did notice that whenever we were out and about, he used to glance over his shoulders a lot and be extremely aware of his surroundings, to the point where he almost seemed disinterested in our own conversations sometimes. And there were some other unusual things about him. He'd dye his hair at least 3 times during his stay, and he would change his clothing style almost on a daily basis. One day he would dress like your typical skater guy. The next day he would wear businessman-like attire, and the day after he would look like a hipster. Also, I would sometimes overhear him talking on the phone outside our room. I am 100% sure that I heard him talk in fluent German and Russian. Now I don't speak these 2 languages, but I know what German sounds like, as I had German classes back in school. And after all, I had been in Germany, a neighbouring country of Denmark, several times before. Russian has a very distinctive sound to it as well, and I'm confident to tell that it wasn't Slovene. This is where things became a little creepy. On the afternoon of the 4th day of our week in the hostel, I was just taking a nap and was suddenly woken up by Alex storming out of the room. I noticed that he had left one of his bags open sitting beside his bed and decided to stow it away in his locker, which he had also left unlocked, so that the others wouldn't be as tempted to steal anything. Well, curiosity got the better of me, and I started to rummage around in his stuff. I found an additional mobile phone, European, Russian, and Swedish currency, and 3 different passports. Different issuing countries under different names, with different birth dates and slightly different pictures. You could tell it was him, though. I also flipped through a notepad full of notes in different languages and handwriting styles. I was totally creeped out at this point, and I was sure that he pretty much lied to me all along. Nothing made any sense anymore. He claimed to be from Slovenia, yet I had never heard him speak it. He even seemed to refuse to speak it. He also claimed not to speak German, yet I was absolutely sure that I overheard him speak it fluently. And what about his Russian skills and the Russian rubles in his bag? And why did he have Swedish krona? And then there were his passports and his strange behaviour, his constant changes of appearance. I decided it wasn't sensible to confront him directly, as I didn't want him to find out I had been going through his stuff. When he came back into the room an hour later, he didn't appear to be very amused to learn that I had stowed his bag for security reasons. He wasn't mad, though. He never was mad, and he never expressed any strong opinions about anything either. Maybe he wasn't shy. Maybe he was hiding something, or hiding from someone or something. The following days were as fun as the previous ones. We spent our time together when we had the time, went for drinks at night, discovered this huge, diverse city, went for shopping, visited some sites, and went out to eat together. Yes, of course I had a hard time containing myself whenever he undressed himself to use the shower, and yes, I could get a little touchy-feely with him when we were a little tipsy. I even went ahead and kissed him on several occasions, making sure to make it seem like I was just joking around. Often, he would just shrug and laugh it off and consider it drunken behaviour, and whenever I told him how handsome and cute he was, and how much I liked him, he just answered something along the lines of, "You're just drunk, this isn't a good idea, you'll just regret that, let's bring you to bed," etc. I was pretty frustrated and confused about everything now. He didn't play along with my advances, but didn't seem to mind me making a move on him either. And his enigmatic behaviour and mysterious belongings made it even worse. He was open-minded, still kind of reserved most of the time, but in hindsight, there was always an air of melancholy around him, a sad expression on his face when he felt unwatched. After the incident with his bag, he made sure his belongings were always stowed away in his locker. I think he grew a little suspicious, so I wasn't really able to find out more, and he definitely wouldn't open up by himself. Those few days were a crazy roller coaster ride full of action, new experiences, mystery and emotions. There were some occasions where I tried to trick or challenge him, but to no avail. I quickly gave up my attempts to find out more and decided to be content with the great time I had with this strange, creepy guy. After all, I had realized that despite everything, he wasn't a danger. His stay at the hostel came to an end, and Alex had to leave first. It was the most awkward goodbye I had ever had. He had already given me his number, and I tried to contact him via text and WhatsApp many times, but he would never answer. Whoever Alex really was, I would die to meet this wonderfully creepy guy again and find out what he really was all about. Back in 2017, I, a female who was 19 at the time, lived in one of many rear units behind a strip of main ones on a quiet street. As a young, extremely dumb 19-year-old in a seemingly safe area of Australia, I didn't really think twice about leaving the house late at night. There had been 3 incidents that had occurred during my stay on that block that left me nervous, and the last one made me think twice about ever leaving my house at night again. I was late to finish class one night, getting off my bus and walking the street down towards my house at around 10 p.m. I was tired and unaware of my surroundings as I pulled into the block, passing what looked like the shadow of a person crouching on the sidewalk with their back towards me. I could hear this muffled noise and could have decided not to be an ass and check on this person, but I became kind of nervous and scurried off towards my unit. Later on, as I became settled and ready for bed, I heard a loud scuffling around on the concrete outside, and that really muffled noise again. I opened my window from the 2nd floor, and did this time call out to ask if this person was all right. But I heard nothing, so I texted my landlord about the incident. Nothing else really came of that until weeks later, when I left my house at night again to walk to the 24-hour servo. As I returned back towards my house, I saw someone again, this time standing still near some bush on the street, alone and not really doing much but staring. The stare. I could feel myself being closely examined. Getting a bit nervous now, as this is the 2nd time I've seen someone standing on the street. I still brushed past, and for some reason I waved. It was then that I took it up with the landlord again, finding out that a few other tenants had also complained about a stranger hanging around at night. The police had been notified, but nothing. It was months later, and everything had sunk into the back of my mind. My then partner and I were in a tiff with each other, and he was leaving my place to go home. I was annoyed, but I didn't feel right letting him walk home by himself, so I walked with him. On the way back, I noticed that dreaded silhouette again in the middle of the road, and under the street lamp this time. I mentally went through every single what, where, who, how, why, then and there. Months later, there was a person just standing in the dark. When I tell you that I literally felt my heart sink, I neared closer to find out that yes, this definitely had to be the same person as before, because he's just standing there, watching the houses on the street. So here I am, now crouched behind a tree and waiting out for what feels like an eternity, while he's fixed there, standing in the middle of the dead road, peeping into the houses out the front, like nothing in the world could break the bizarre fixation on the units. I remember trying to justify it in my head, trying to play it off like it wasn't as weird as it was, and soon decided that maybe I am just being paranoid about all of this. I remember getting antsy, thinking, forget this, I'm going home. So with that, I got up to pass him, trying to make it as smooth as possible, just in case I had actually been wrong about the entire situation. And within seconds of passing him, I met with his eyes. Something forced me to bolt. Maybe it was the fact that I remember him grinning at me from within 2 arms' distance, or maybe the fact that he shrieked when he saw me too. But I ran so fast, shocking even myself about how fast I could run, when lo and behold, I could hear gravel crunching behind me. I got in, slammed my door, and in a frenzy called the police, practically yelling at the top of my lungs, in hopes that if he was following me, he'd hear it. The landlord, my family, everyone that I knew, I was frantically calling that night. I got my neighbour to sleep over too, and learned later on in the week that CCTV had picked up that person that had deed run after me all the way up to my door, jumped into the closest bush to my house, and had waited around for me for 10 minutes. He had even watched my landlord inspect the inside of the bush, then 10 minutes later, the person got out and casually walked away, taking the back exit through the path on the side. Now, despite being too paranoid to leave at all for a while, I didn't hear anything again. The police did eventually arrive that night. Around the unit was questioned, but we heard nothing of it. I still have no idea who this person was, and I have no idea why he would pop up in the complex at random times just to stand around for hours. I've no idea why he chased me, and no clue why he was never seen again after the fact. Even now I'm still uncomfortable with the idea of leaving at night, even in a new area. So please, no more weird night strangers. So I live in the downtown part of a large Midwest city that is very populated and well lit. It's full of bars, restaurants, police stations and fire stations, etc. The point being that this area has loads of people walking around, and usually only gets a bit sketchy if you divert from the main streets and onto side roads and alleyways. Last night my friend, a 23-year-old male, and me, a 24-year-old female, went to a COVID-safe get-together at another friend's house. As it wasn't too late when we were leaving, we decided to take the train home and walk the rest of the way. When we left the station and came to the first intersection that we had to cross to get home, I noticed that there was a guy around our age standing across the street and seemingly headed in the opposite direction. He was wearing a bright neon outfit of some sort, and when the lights changed and we crossed the street, this guy didn't move. He was blank-faced and just stayed on the sidewalk as we passed by him. As I got a closer look at him though, I noticed that he was wearing a neon ski suit specifically. It was neon pink with highlighted yellow accents, made with that waterproof polyester type fabric that makes that rubbing, sliding sound when you walk. Once we'd passed him, I made a comment to my friend that it was in fact a ski suit, and it must be from one of the bars in the area that's doing a ski-themed outdoor experience. We continued a block further down the main street, when all of a sudden we started hearing this swishing sound, and both get the feeling of being watched. I turned around to see where the sound was coming from, and noticed that tracksuit guy is now walking in the same direction as us, and is about 6 feet or so behind, closing the distance quickly. We continued walking, not paying much mind, as people change their direction around here all the time. Not to mention that in the city you get people of all different walking paces, so it's not unusual for someone to walk behind you and pass by you to continue their pace. But once he caught up to us, he didn't pass. Instead, he kept pace with us as if he knew us, then got as close to us as possible as he was walking. The swish-swish sound of his pants continued rubbing together as he kept up and remained silent. After a block of him basically walking on top of us, we were still under the assumption that he was just someone making their way to where they were going and just had no concept of personal space. So we decided to quicken our pace to create some distance. We got a couple of feet further, but we again heard the swish-swish of his pants. He was right on top of us again. We did this a couple of times, changing the pace to see if he would just walk around us, and every time he would adjust to stay as close as humanly possible. At this point we knew something wasn't right, and we were now on high alert. We'd come to an underground tunnel that we had to walk through, and it was built because of a construction site that was about a half a block long. We entered the tunnel and quickened our pace, as we both knew we were now in a confined space with someone who was acting really creepy, so it's a potential recipe for a bad situation. I guess this time that switching our pace threw him off though, because after a couple of seconds from entering the tunnel, I started to hear the shuffling of the moving fabric of his suit and felt movement immediately behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, and the guy was doing what I could only describe as the arm-wine milling you see in cartoons when people are getting ready to fall. He was full-on leaning forward, flailing his arms and reaching out for something to balance him. We made eye contact, and he started to lean towards me. I quickly averted my gaze and quickened my pace again, only to feel the wind from the movement of his hands falling through the air where my shoulder was a couple of seconds before I sped up. We eventually came to the end of the tunnel and continued walking towards the intersection. At this point, everyone was dead silent, and my friend and I were exchanging terrified glances with the foreboding sound of the swish-swish of his pants as he kept up. At this point, the tension was so thick and terrifying. We both had that gut feeling of knowing something bad was going to happen, and the swishing of his pants being some kind of messed up, "you're gonna get murdered" countdown. We knew we needed to get away as soon as possible, so we picked up the pace to full and ran across an intersection as cars were passing through. Unfortunately though, we could hear the swish-swish of his pants as this creep persisted and resumed a couple of feet behind. I then suddenly decided to grab my friend and said, "Hey, let's stop at this bus stop to hit the vape." So we stopped and watched as this guy just walked past us and continued down the street. We stood there for a while, smoking and feeling relieved as we watched him continue down the block. He reached the intersection, then stopped. At first we thought that he was waiting for the cross light, but as both sides went, he stayed on the corner. However, after about 10 minutes, we realized that he was watching and waiting for us. We then at that point decided not to walk his way, as we were only a couple of blocks from the apartment, so knew he could have easily followed us home. With that in mind, we decided to go in the opposite direction and loop back through another path. The next thing I knew though, I heard my friend say, "Oh my God, he's heading this way." I turned around just in time to see that sure enough, he was starting to break into a full-on sprint, heading in our direction. My friend looked at me and yelled, "We have to run, now." So we set off down the block, hung a sharp right off the main road towards some apartment buildings, and at that point knew only two things. One, I am a crap runner and won't get far at all. And two, at the time before we all started running, he was only half a block away, and we had only gained another half a block, so there was no way he hadn't seen us change direction, and was for sure going to catch us. Out of desperation, I reverted to the old logic of safety in numbers, and grabbed the first couple I could see, which was a couple that was walking hand in hand. I begged for them to let us walk with them, and frantically explained what was happening. At first the boyfriend was hesitant, but once I caught my breath and talked to the girlfriend, she could tell that this was serious, and that we needed help, so they agreed. During the time I was talking to the couple, my friend, who had continued to run a small distance past as I had stopped without warning, began to walk back to us, the couple and I, only to see that the creeper was standing perfectly still, blank-faced, and watching us at the corner of where we had turned off on the main road. My friend noticed that he'd begun to follow us as we began to walk with the couple, and hurried us along. Unfortunately, we had caught the couple right before they were about to head into their apartment building, but they kindly let us into their courtyard to wait until we felt safe. After a while, we eventually walked home, keeping a constant eye over our shoulders, feeling absolutely terrified. But we made it. I'm a student in a South American country. I speak English and French, so I tutor people in my free time to make money to buy textbooks and medicines. Because of the pandemic, many of my students couldn't pay me anymore, so I was left with no students and no income, until this guy showed up. He was around 50, loud and weird. He has a daughter who was my age, I'm 19, and a wife. And yet every time he talked about them, he'd be either trash-talking his wife or saying stuff about his daughter, like how she's really sexy, and talking about her boyfriends. It's quite scary. I have been tempted to stop teaching him, but until I find other students, I can't. The thing is, though, we live in the same city, but we've not met, yet he's obsessed with finding out my address. He was telling me things like, "You're beautiful," or "It's so strange that you don't have a boyfriend." I found out that he draws, but he doesn't draw suns and flowers. He only draws naked women, and he draws them while looking at me during our classes. Luckily, these are online classes, but I swear every time I have to teach him, which is 5 times a week, I just want to die. He always talks about how hot he was when he was young, and about how many women he used to sleep with. He says the most sexist things. He has another daughter who is 9 years old, and tells me how he's worried about her turning out gay, because he can deal with a whore daughter, but not a lesbian. It's just non-stop inappropriate comments about women, about me, and about my sexual life. He knows I'm struggling with money, and so he's obviously taking advantage of that. Lately he's been asking for my address, but I just laugh and play dumb and try to change the subject. But he just keeps insisting, and says things like, "I want to know where you live so we can hang out." He's so awful. But last week it got really scary. He said that he had another student for me, which I said was great. Then the next morning I woke up to 5 messages from him, asking me personal information for this new student, and of course asking for my address. The thing is, he'd actually found an address, my last address. I'd moved some months ago, and the address he'd found was my previous one. I'm not stupid. I have never put my personal info online, and the guy is a programmer. He works with computers, and he's really good at it. So I'm scared, because the only place he could have found that address is on a government website, as it's listed as my current residence. He also found out my full name in the same way. Now I always use VPNs, have full system protection on my phone and laptop that my cousin installed for me, and I have tried searching for my address online, but it just doesn't show up. I'm freaked out. Every time I go out now, I'm afraid I'll encounter him in the street. Let's just hope we will never meet. Back at the turn of the century, I was a student nurse in the capital. I was also battling with depression, having let myself go. Being a big guy, at 6'4", and usually around 250 pounds, meant I was around 350 pounds at the time, with a big bushy beard, and apparently that helped in this situation. It was summer, and I was accompanying my underage cousin, who was 16 years old at the time, to a gynecologist. You see, she had become sexually active at 14 and gotten pregnant, because sex ed is crappy. But sadly she had a miscarriage. So due to the nature of the miscarriage, she had to have a regular checkup every year, because my aunt couldn't fathom her daughter having sinful sex outside of marriage. Their relationship was tumultuous at best. She had never accompanied her daughter on any of the appointments, so that responsibility fell either to my mother or me, and we had an excellent relationship. So my cousin is what you would describe as tall, lithe, with a girl next door prettiness. She was wearing a light summer dress to accommodate for the summer heat, and while we took a taxi to go to the appointment, afterwards we took the bus, so we decided to go for a coffee and relax for a couple of hours before going home. The route being one of the major arteries in the capital meant that the bus was almost full. Not packed like sardines, but getting there. As we stepped onto the bus, a couple of people noticed my cousin, and as we were standing, all of the seats were taken, a couple of creepy older men started slowly moving towards her. Noticing them and detecting their intentions, as groping in the buses was very popular back then, I positioned myself behind her, but I completely missed the obvious creep staring at my cousin's bare legs. In fact, I only noticed him when we hit our stop, and he stood next to me before we disembarked. The guy was in his mid-30s, and he was what central casting would send if you asked for a sleazy character. Imagine René Auberjonois' role in Police Academy 5. He got off the bus at the same stop as we did, and followed us from a distance. I kept him in mind, but being a major artery, it was a busy and popular street. We found a cafe we liked and sat down, and as we were having our coffee, my cousin told me that the guy had sat a couple of tables behind me on the side and was staring at her, so I moved to the next chair, blocking his view. Then things came to a boil when it was time to leave. I got up to use the bathroom and pay, leaving my cousin alone for a few minutes, and as I was paying, my phone rang. It was my uncle, my cousin's father. He had called to see how everything had gone. Despite having similar beliefs with his wife, he was secretly more caring. And as I was talking to him, I noticed my cousin standing up, and the sleazy guy talking to her and trying to give her a card. I started walking towards them, catching a part of the conversation. "Make you famous and have a great career," I heard him say. "I don't care," she replied. "You can make a lot of money," he insisted. "I already do," she said as she turned red and bitch slapped him. Sleazy was pissed now and tried to grab her when I arrived. "Is there a problem?" I asked, knowing that there was. "Bitch slapped me for no reason. I was making a business proposal," he complained. "That creep pinched my ass," my cousin said. "I did not," I interrupted him and said. "Leave. She isn't interested." "And who are you, her boyfriend?" he replied angrily. Now I don't know what made me say the next words, but they took the anger out of him. "No, her pimp." At that point he stopped and took a good look at me. The guy was a head shorter than me and weighed around 170 pounds, soaking wet. "Sorry man, I'm sorry." He panicked and quickly walked away. We left a few minutes later, taking a taxi back this time, and as I said in the beginning, my cousin reminded me of the incident because he saw this sleazy's picture on the news. He had been arrested a couple of weeks ago for possession of child pornography and attempted rape of a minor. So this happened when I was around 21 or 22. My job, such as it was a paper round, and this particular round was a morning one, meaning I was biking around at about 5 in the morning. Usually my rounds were fairly quiet, since nobody likes being outside at that time of day, and this day wasn't much of an exception, until I got to the library. The library mailbox was inside of the wall, which was perpendicular to the wall with the front door in it. In other words, delivering that paper ensured that I had a wall extending in 2 directions away from me, and only one way to walk in. I turned around after putting the paper in the mailbox, and I saw a guy approaching me from a distance. I also saw the flickering of a huge knife in the streetlight, and as he got closer, I could see that it was a bread knife. As I mentioned, there were walls on both sides of me, and this knife-wielding guy was blocking the only exit. Now that he was standing in front of me, I could smell alcohol around him. My first thought was, I'm finished. My second thought was, okay, this guy's got a bread knife, so he'll probably swing and not stab. My coat's pretty thick, so if I block the swing at least a little bit with my arm, the cut will hopefully be shallow and I can run for it. I mentally prepared for the guy to demand my wallet and my phone, and then he said, "Hey man, did you happen to find a wallet on the ground around here?" I was kind of stunned, so I very hesitantly said, "No, sorry." And the dude just smiled and said, "Okay, cool, thanks. Hey, relax dude, come on, fist bump." And he actually fist bumped me with the hand holding the knife. I just went along with it because I had no clue what was going on. I was expecting him to mug me, not politely ask if I'd found his wallet. The guy then began to walk off very casually, and as he did so, he turned around one last time and said, "If you do find a wallet, take it to the cops for me. It's got a lot of money in it." So I just told him I would, and he just raised his hand in greeting and walked away. I got out there as quickly as I could. Fortunately, the rest of my round was in the direction away from where he was headed, and fortunately, I never saw him again on any of my subsequent rounds. This situation in the end didn't turn out to actually be dangerous, but it's still one of the creepiest things that has ever happened to me. So the place I work at calls around to other businesses in our area at the beginning of every shift, and around 1 or 2 months ago, I talked to this guy from one of the other businesses. It was the first time I talked to this guy from this particular business, and all was fine. The second time we spoke, he asked for my number. I politely refused, as I prefer not to give my numbers to random strangers. He was trying to be flirty, and I let him know that it was coming off creepy, not knowing anything about this person and vice versa. I told him that for all he knew, I could be a 60-year-old woman. Then came the third time we spoke. He made it very clear he was single as a Pringle, and he can be very persistent. Then he continued to ask a few personal questions, which I responded to with non-answers. The fourth time, he told me that he was probably way too old for me anyway, and talked about his son that was in his late teens. He then started asking about my workplace and how it's pretty nice compared to the other businesses in the area and needs to check it out soon, at which point I then referred to a better business in the area. So this Saturday I had gone into work to finish some paperwork and was talking with my colleagues. It was during a change of shift, business as usual, and they were talking away about a person currently in our business and about how long he had been there. Thank goodness I was working at my desk in the back office for the last hour or two, because this was the guy. I didn't notice him when I'd come into work, but he had already been there for hours. He came into my workplace and stayed as long as he possibly could, creeped out my colleagues, and seemed pretty sketchy to boot. I honestly didn't know what to do. I don't know how worried I should be, but this guy came into my work and made it very clear who he was to my colleagues. They hadn't had to talk to him before, and haven't a clue who he is. He'd left a bad impression on them, and was still there after I left. Hey there, it's me again, Miss Fearsome. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, then please hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me further, please check out my Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Also, check out my new YouTube membership levels for some exclusive perks. So until next time, stay happy, stay safe, and remember, keep being creepy.